And you've just heard Cold Star, the new single from Outblinker, and I'm delighted to be joined by Chris from Outblinker now. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Alistair. How you doing?
I'm really well, thanks. So what can you tell us about Cold Star?
Cold Star began life during lockdown. So we're an electronic rock band, but we're a live project. So the whole thing kind of came together just on the really simple premise that we were going to play electronic music, but we weren't going to use any laptops. And so that was all like drum kits, synthesizers, some kind of retro gear and guitars and vocal sampling and stuff all done in real time. And that's still what we do. But then obviously during lockdown, I was actually living with Luigi, who's the producer, and we were just sort of kicking about and stuck in the flat. And we started file swapping with David in particular, the other kind of core member of the group. And we were just throwing these ideas about. And, so by the end of lockdown, we had about 8 or 9 tracks. And this was one of the ones that was really punchy and short and felt like there was something really accessible there. So we started we had a record that had got kind of trapped in time because of COVID. But we started putting together this other collection as well. And so while we were doing the finishing touches to the album, we were in a position to mess about with these songs, and we started inviting guest vocalists because Outblinker's ostensibly an instrumental band. We do have vocals, but it tends to be vocoder or sampled or distorted in some way that's unrecognizable. And it was nice to just have the opportunity to get a singer involved. Iorta Rota, Raquel Aragon, a Spanish musician who's based in Glasgow now, is a friend of ours, and just she's got so much charisma. And I've just, when I see her play, she does quite a PJ Harvey type thing.
Right.
And I just felt like she had a total Karen O performance in her, and so we got together and she smashed it. She recorded the stuff herself, again at distance, and then we edited it down into the mix. And it was an unusual way to go about writing songs for a band that's basically a live band.
Yeah.
But it produced these really interesting results. So we decided at the end of this year, we'll stick a couple of these kind of collaborative tracks out, and then at the start of next year, we've got that debut album proper coming out.
Well, as you mentioned, you've got other collaborations coming up. Can you talk about those at all, or is it okay to do that?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with quite a few people. We've got Kim Grant and Siobhan Wilson on our album, both kind of like female soloists. Siobhan tends to do folkier stuff. Kim does like kind of indie singer-songwriter things. We've got Sean Leonard as well, a beautiful falsetto singer, male pop star in the making from Scotland. Just various people chipping in. There's a couple that are still sitting waiting on their finding their other half. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
The
okay.
songs are kind of pretty far down the road, but we're still waiting for that person to kind of show themselves that will really finish them off. But it's been a really fun way to make a record. It really has. Like, we tend to approach things quite conceptually anyway. Just this record is such and such approach. This record is such and such. So once this first album is done, I think I can see us bringing together a full collection of these collaborations because it's been a really fun thing to do. It also makes me feel quite young because that seems to be the thing you do now, right? Is that you do, a song by featuring X, Y, and Z people. So yeah, very contemporary.
Siobhan Wilson's an interesting choice because although you say she's got a more folky style, she has got some darker tracks, previously before. I'm thinking of her earlier albums, definitely.
Absolutely, yeah. She's very ethereal in the way
Yeah.
that she performs. And again, I mean, I'm a big fan of Siobhan's, and she's a good friend of the band as well. And so it was just, there were a couple of bits there where we were just like, this is crying out for that kind of haunting vocal,
Yeah.
especially because she's so in control of her own voice. I mean, I can sing, but I'm not really in control of it. It's kind of like driving, trying to stay on the road. Whereas Siobhan is just so absolutely, completely in control of her voice that you can set her a challenge, and she smashes it.
So just so I'm clear, you've got this album that you're working towards, but that's not the collaborative stuff. That's a separate thing.
Exactly, yeah. Sorry, it's a bit confusing, but it's just as a result of lockdown, really. We were about to go on a full European tour and launch our album 2 weeks before lockdown kicked in, and it knocked the entire thing off schedule. And what actually happened was, as I'm sure we will not be the only ones, our drummer at the time, he was a teacher, and life just became so uncertain that he basically had to stop touring because he had to move, he had to basically reskill and then focus on his income. So we ended up losing a lot of momentum because of COVID. But we wanted to make sure that we used the time while we were building the band back up, getting the touring lineup sorted again. We wanted to use that time, which is where these songs came from, us staying productive within that moment. And now that we're ready to release the album proper, as in the core album band, we just have these other, maybe like I said, maybe 8 or 9 songs just kicking about. So I can see us at the far end of the record, bringing them all together for another collection of singles. But the record in itself is something we've been working on for about 4 or 5 years now because of life getting in the way. But I'm very, very, very much looking forward to playing both the record live and then learning to adapt these songs into the live set as well.
You could support yourself. You could have.
we could do it. I remember going to see the Smashing Pumpkins years ago, and they had their set divided into like 2 different kind of approaches to the band. We could do that. Yeah, different costume change halfway.
But in all seriousness, what was clearly a negative could become a positive, because you've got these songs that you're desperate to go and play live, but you've got this but this sizable project with other people as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the circumstances were unpredictable, but we're in that position where a lot of bands will drop a record and then struggle to put together stuff quick enough back after it. And we're already in a position where we're like, come on, hurry up, we're going to the second one.
So tell us a bit about Outblinker and how you kind of started, how it came about.
It was the result of like the smashing together of a number of groups in Glasgow. I was in a band called Dead and American. I was also in a band called Hae Enemy with David Warner. There were 2 brothers, the Costello brothers, who were called Young Philadelphia at the time. One of them, I think, is now better known as Graham Costello of Strata. Astonishing jazz musician.
Absolutely.
Brilliant drummer, multi-instrumental performer and writer. So Graham's the drummer on our album. Graham's not the live touring drummer, though. He's just far too busy. So Graham did the recording with us. We now play with Fraser McPhail as a live drummer, also of a successful band, Coffin Mulch, a kind of death metal band who are doing really, really well just now. Ross Prentice is in the band now of Dear Leader. We've had a lot of... It's the result. It's a musicians band, if you know what I mean. It's people wanting to work together. And as I say, the only remit in the start was that we loved going to see electronic music, but we loved seeing electronic music that was fully played. That sense of danger. When you've got a backing track, I mean, okay, you could pull the plug out of the computer, but short of that, there's not much chance for things to go off the rails. Whereas with a live band, it's very easy, for a guitar string to break or a drum skin to break. We wanted that dangerous element, but within the genre of electronica. So we just basically set ourselves a challenge of playing electronic music live with all that energy, with all that visual movement that you get from like an indie rock band. I will be honest, in hindsight, there's easier tasks you could set yourself, because carting all these synths about and all the pedal boards about around Europe has not been the easiest of things. But it's a lot of fun. It's a big challenge, and it grew arms and legs. People wanted to get involved. People really liked the concept behind it, and as I say, because it was instrumental, there was always people coming forth with ideas, and yeah, it's been a completely different approach to being in a band from what I think any of us were used to, and it's been really productive.
And I think from someone who goes to gigs, most people want to see people playing live and playing instruments live. There was a time where there was a lot of seeing someone on stage with a laptop, and everyone's kind of going, okay, the music's great, but what are we watching here? I think people really do want to, that danger, as you say, that someone could fall off the stage or whatever might be the case.
Yeah, it was exactly that. It was the thrill of live music being genuinely on that knife edge of, the performance is up and it's running and you can't stop, and it's just, I really enjoy that. I get there's a real buzz from the danger of that. And it was stretching out our abilities, I'll be honest. I mean, some of the guys in the band, the likes of Graham and the likes of Luigi, were phenomenal musicians. But for people like me who grew up playing kind of punk and post-punk and hardcore, we had to really test ourselves to get up to the technical level to do that. So that challenge was nice as well.
We had Graham Costello on the show with Cahill, and Costello has...
yes, Kevin. Yeah, he's his partner in crime.
Exactly. But they were saying how really they wanted every performance to be different every time. That nothing would be... If you came to see them 2 nights in a row, there would be differences there. And that sounds like what you're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. Kevin's a lovely guy as well. I'm going to see him in about a week's time in London for a drink, so
Well,
Great
say hello.
musicians. I will do. I will do.
And I'm interested by the sound. It's particularly on this on Cold Star, because it's got. I mean, I started looking back at my old 80s goth records almost, Sisters of Mercy, Bauhaus, kind of heavier Depeche Mode, that kind of thing. Is that a fair kind of range of influences?
Absolutely. I mean, for a number of years now, Outblinker's been working with Benjamin Power, who performs as Blank Mass, and he's one half of the band F Buttons, which I'll keep family friendly for the so Ben and his love of retro synth stuff really had there was a feedback loop of influence on us there, and so we started digging into that. Luigi's a huge Depeche Mode fan. David is a huge fan of a lot of kind of 80s dark electronica. And I think we just started trying to combine that, but with the melody of some of the band. I mean, I love LaRue. I love this kind of like weird bedroom synth stuff. And it was just trying to find a happy ground somewhere in there. As I mentioned, Yes. I think some of their later stuff, when it got Cynthia, really nailed some of the spirit of that 80s music. And you mentioned Susie and the Banshees. And so, there was, honestly, it was just to get something that you could dance to, but that wouldn't be sickly sweet or overly processed. Because I think there is a danger with a lot of pop music now that it's almost hard to evolve it being overproduced, and it's it's maybe like eating Pringles or something. It's too easy, Whereas we wanted to make something that was poppy, but it was a little bit difficult. So it's still a little bit too dark for some people. It's still not quite slick enough for some people. And I think for me, that gives it a bit of longevity, because there's a little bit of tune in it, and it's a hard formula to nail. I'm really happy with this particular track in that sense. I think it got that balance, the sweet and the sour and all that stuff quite nicely.
And you talked a lot about the importance of playing live, which is interesting, because when I first heard it, I thought this is a song kind of demanding to be played live. You can imagine, I'm presuming you play loud. Would that be fair?
It's very fair to say we're a loud band. We are a loud band, yes.
Because that's what I really, it made me want to see it and hear it and almost kind of feel it, physically feel it when you're hearing that. You think, I can imagine this Spinal Tap, say, turned up to 11. You can imagine that kind of thing.
One of the things that probably makes our band a wee bit unusual, we haven't actually played an awful lot in the UK, because I'll be totally honest, we tend to skip it and go straight to Europe. And since we started, there's been more of a scene for what we're doing there. I think because the European underground, particularly in France and Italy and the north of Spain, is very into bands that are messing with the formula. They're very willing to go with you on a little journey. They don't so much want you to fit into boxes, or you're an indie rock band, you're an electro, but they're quite happy to kind of straddle things. But as a result of doing those tours, we play in the most unorthodox of venues. We'll play in squats, we'll play in converted slaughterhouses, we'll play outdoors, we'll play, just all kinds of weird rooms. And so our entire live setup had to be very adaptable, because there are multiple shows on a tour where we'd end up doing our own sound. That's what the European squat scene's like. You go and play a social collective and 200 people turn up, but you're basically playing a punk venue, but you're playing it with electronic instruments. So the music just naturally gravitated towards being quite loud and quite confrontational, and allowing us that dynamic. Songs that drop right down but then explode. And I think, let's be honest, bands like Mogwai are very famous for that. Mogwai on record were an instrumental band, but they were fiercely loud live. And that dynamic power, I think, is something that we really wanted to capture. I certainly don't want to emulate musically too many bands like post-rock bands, Mogwai and stuff like that, as much as I like them. But I did want to emulate that sense of dynamism when you go and see them, and you feel it, as you say, you really feel impacted by the music instead of just hearing it above your head,
No, absolutely. And do you think that's interesting that you've kind of found your playing live more in Europe? Do you think in this country there's more of a look to kind of categorize, and there's not that fluidity between lineups and things like that?
I don't want to be too curmudgeonly, because it doesn't really get you anywhere, and there's loads of great promoters and loads of great venues in the UK, but it's not quite the same as Europe. I think it's harder, for example, to make a living at a certain level in the UK touring. So first of all, that dictates where you're going to go. We will find it much easier to pay the bills from touring in Europe than we will in our own country, sadly. And part of that also comes from the fact that if you travel to the middle of nowhere in France, people are just so grateful that a band has made that trip that they will come out in droves and watch it and try to understand it. I think the flip is if we go and play a show in London, and we've had nice days in London, but they're probably in the minority of the shows we've done in London. There's more of a sense of you're trying to persuade the audience to go, and you're trying to persuade the audience to like it, and it feels a lot more one directional, that transaction. And so I think something about European audiences, something about not feeling like they're the centre of the world, something about the fact that a lot of them are community-based venues, and therefore they feel invested in supporting their local venue and just going along to see what's on. It's a very warm welcome, and also the treatment in Europe is fantastic. I think it's again, I'm not the first to say it, that the treatment of lower level bands in the UK is not great. You often don't get fed, often don't have basic costs covered and things like that. Europe tends to, I'm generalising, but in my experience, it tends to be a bit more considerate of what the musicians are doing to try and make it happen.
So what does an Outblinker show look like live? How do you put it together?
Very sparkly. So we did decide, we used to dabble a bit with visuals, but what we ended up doing was sort of like backlighting ourselves, because it's the same way with a lot of the photos of the band. We don't really want our mugs being out there because we're getting older, there's better things to look at. People want to know how many people are in the band and roughly what they're doing, but we made the shows a lot about that kind of noirish 80s lighting of like LEDs and mirror balls and stuff like that, and then just trying to get people to engage in the ambience of the gig rather than watching us pouting, so it's not really on the menu. But yeah, as I say, we play in a lot of small venues, so quite often the stage is quite cramped. Our drummers have consistently been human dervishes, so Fraser, Graham, Grant, they're all very, very animated people to watch. And yeah, so it's quite lively. It's got a bit of the post-hardcores about it, the drive-in sort of physicality. But then obviously, because you're kind of glued to a synthesizer for a lot of it, you can't go quite as berserk as maybe those guys could.
And it goes back to a lot of the influences we talked about earlier on, where it was kind of dark stage, dark setting, lots of dry ice going on. But that kind of thing where, it wasn't, people weren't, running from the stage side to side. They were just playing as hard as they could. Yeah.
I think it's a fun thing to watch. I think it really sucks people in. And that's really what we tried to do. It's definitely a world away from the bands I used to play in, doing the whole kind of hardcore thing with all the lights up and just, the Fugazi style thing. It's the opposite end of the spectrum from that.
So once the album's out, when's the album due out? Next year?
The album is due out on March the 29th.
Excellent. And what's the plan after that? Have you got that tour that you had to abandon way back? Is that kind of almost there?
Yes, so we're working with a French and an Italian and a British label, so we'll be doing a few weeks for that, and then that's prior to the summer, and then the various guys in the band have got some other commitments, and then we'll also be going back out again at the end of the summer to do some festival stuff in Europe. We will do some UK stuff in the meantime, but we'll probably do that on a more limited basis because, as I said, I'm afraid it just isn't quite as, the time isn't just as well spent here. We try to maximise the time over there and just pick out particularly good places here. The likes of obviously Glasgow, Dundee, love those cities to play in. Had a good time in Edinburgh, but then going down to Bristol is a great place to play. Leeds, Brighton, those kind of places. But in terms of trawling up and down the M6, no, not going to spend weeks doing that. I'd much rather be driving through the fields of the west coast of France.
It's interesting, those cities that you've mentioned have a kind of history of industrial, not just industrial music, but industrial work as well. That often the two go hand in hand.
There also, there are certain hotspots for especially the underground scenes in the UK. But the years of trips and weeks at a time around these islands, I'm afraid, is done. I would far rather just bite the bullet and get across the channel. Although I will say that has become a fair bit trickier.
Sure.
Post Brexit, we really faced that. We were on tour in late 22 we did a European tour, and just not with the album, obviously, because it wasn't ready as a result of COVID, but just out there, reminding people we were alive. And wow, the logistics are certainly formidable now.
Yeah. Well, when you do have dates or when you have news, let us know and we can tell the listeners all about it.
It'd be a pleasure.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me, and all the best with Cold Star.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Alistair.
And this is Outblinker and Kurt Godel.